Hello, my name's Bob Anderson. I'm the CEO and founder of the Leadership Circle and the creator of the Leadership Circle profile through which you're going to be receiving some feedback. The purpose of this video is not so much to outline all the details in this assessment. You have a very extensive interpretation manual for that, and a great coach can help you understand your results. What I want to do today is talk you through a few key concepts, leadership concepts, that form the architecture of this assessment. The Leadership Circle profile is unique in that, unlike other 360s, it packs a lot of theory and leadership framework into the architecture of the results you're getting. So some are saying now it's a thorough integration of the last 50 years of research and theory and framework that's come out of the leadership development field. The core framework and the core tension that we manage as adults, in my opinion, and especially if we lead, is a tension between purpose and safety. I think each of us is oriented toward a purpose that wants to come through our lives. And I think leaders, especially great leaders, get onto that. They discern that, they distill that, and they stand for it. When we see great leadership, we see someone standing for something that's vital, that's important to them, that matters more than anything else. And they build their life around it. We create organizations that reflect that purpose. We distill it into vision, and a vision of the kind of contribution we'd like our lives to be about. Now, I don't know about you, but when I orient my life toward this, I get quickly that it's inherently risky. I'd wish for a safe way to be about this, but I haven't found one. And so the natural inherent tension in clarifying and focusing on this is that it immediately raises risk. Now, I'm an entrepreneur. I have a growing global business, so I understand that to pursue this, I'm at risk all the time. And when we work in large organizations, we're constantly managing this need. In other words, we work in order to pay the mortgage. We work to provide financial security for ourselves. And I'm about that. My kids are not yet through college, and I got to pay the mortgage, and financial retirement is still not completely secure. And so I'm working in part for this. And if I work inside a large organization, then I also get that my security is tied with moving up. Not only is there more income if I move up, but I also have more scope and impact, potential for impact on what I'm all about. And so in organizations, we want to move up, and we need to do that safely. And in order for that to happen, we need to win, maintain, gain the approval of people around us, especially people above us, key stakeholders. To fall from grace, to lose favor, to lose credibility with key stakeholders and people above us, not a good thing for our career. And so inherent in leadership is this tension, and we're managing it all the time. Strategically, we're managing it financially, we're managing it politically, all the time. There's no safe way to be great, and that's the deal. Now, how does that tie to the Leadership Circle profile? You're going to be getting results on this that actually are organized around this core tension. So how much you orient your leadership toward this kind of focus around purpose and vision and what you're all about in terms of contributing will show up in the top half of the circle. If more of your orientation shows up over here, then you're going to get scores more in the bottom half of the circle. When we orient our leadership, our life and our leadership toward creating what matters most, and that's the primary driver, we're in what I call creative structure of mind. When we orient more toward, and what's primary focus, staying safe, then we're more likely going to be in what I call reactive structure of mind. So I want to take a few minutes and explain the difference between these two structures. Now, I like the notion of structure because in systems dynamics structure, the structure of something determines its performance. My dad was an engineer, so I grew up early learning that the design of something predetermines its patterns of performance. My car is not going to race at NASCAR. In fact, but NASCAR's not going to get 60 miles to the gallon. So the structure of something determines its performance. And so when we're in this structure, we get a very different pattern of performance in our results and leadership than we do when we're in this structure. So let's look at reactive structure to start with. I once was asked to speak at a life insurance convention hosted by one of the top life insurance salesmen in the country. He was there to train people how to sell life insurance. I spoke there. After I spoke, somebody came up to me and said, "You were talking about my life." And I said, "Yeah, I try to do that." And he says, No. I need to talk to you. Can we have lunch?" And I said, "Sure, let's have lunch." So when we sat down to have lunch, this is exactly what he said. And it's vintage reactive structure. So I said, "What do you want to talk about?" He said, "I have a problem." Now notice, vintage reactive structure starts here. Problem. So he says, "I have a problem." So what's the problem? He says, "I'm not learning anything." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, I know how to sell life insurance and I'm really good at it." And I said, "So other than the fact that you've spent a week of your life and some travel expenses, what's the problem?" And he said, "My results don't show it." I said, "Tell me about your results." He says, "Well, I look out at my results and they're really bad. And I know I can do better than that. And I know I'm putting things at risk if I don't pick them up. And furthermore, I'm disgusted with myself. And so when I see that, I swing into gear. And I'm really good at it. And I do all the stuff they're telling us to do here." And about 6 to 9 months later, my results are right on track. I said, "So what's the problem?" And he said, 9 months after that, my results are back where they were, and I'm doing it all over again. And that's been my career. It hasn't really gone anywhere. It's just been up and down. Vintage reactive structure. Let's take a look at it. First of all, what's a clue to the reactivity here is that he never talked about this. It was obvious by its absence, if you will. It never came up. And so what galvanizes his attention is some threat to this, to which he mobilizes around. And we all have that, and we have our own strategies for doing that. In his case, when the problem grows, we feel fear. He feels the threat to this. And so he swings into gear, and I call it a reaction. I'll tell you why in a minute. As he reacts, he's good at it, so he tends to solve the problem. So if we're looking at the results of his performance over time, the pattern of performance goes like this. He swings into gear when results are low, and he's good at it. Fear goes up, his reaction goes up, and the problem goes away. So he's solving the problem. Now let's look what happens in reactive structure. The problem's going away. What's happening to his fear? It's going down. So what's happening to the tendency to continue his reaction and stay the course? Going down. So the next loop through this structure, he goes back to poor results. And so that's the pattern in reactive structure. Every time you come around the loop, it goes the other way, it oscillates. Because the underlying structure here is that my reaction is designed to make my fear go away. It's designed to reduce my internal conflict. It's not designed to create what I want. It's designed to feel safer. And the strategies that I use when that's the motivating structure tend to maintain equilibrium about some normal state. And so this is not a bad structure. It's just a structure in system dynamics term, which is an oscillating loop. It seeks equilibrium. Just like a thermostat on a wall, when it gets too hot in the room, the blowers come on, the temperature goes down. When it gets too cold in the room, the blowers kick off, the temperature goes back up. It's designed to maintain, to get back to normal when things are threatened. creative structure very different and gets very different patterns of performance. So the starting place is not so much threat or risk, it's much more about what am I trying to build and create, knowing that there's inherent risk to that. So it isn't that I don't have fear, it's not running me. This is running me. This is what my leadership is all about, and I have to manage the part of me which gets scared, the part of me which knows I got to bet the farm in order to create that. And so to the extent that I stay focused on what really matters, the natural motivating energy is passion, love, commitment, intrigue, excitement, out of which I take action to bring into being what I care about, the future that I want, the organization I believe in. And so in this loop, every time you go around, it increases. So the closer I get to this, the more of this I have, the more of this I'm likely to take, which brings me closer to this, which increases my passion. So the natural tendency in this structure is for growth, or in systems dynamics language, it's a growth loop, and it's designed to create a correspondence between my current reality and the vision that I'm holding. We think that's leadership. Now, you're going to get results on your 360. So in the top half of the circle are key competencies. These are the kinds of competencies, key creative competencies. These are the kinds of competencies that show up on any really good 360 that are well researched to be related to leadership effectiveness, but they don't boot up well on reactive structure. They only boot up well and consistently out of this creative life stance, mindset, structure. So please look at your results here as a good, thorough competency assessment map, but also a clue how much of my life energy and orientation is in this creative structure. If I'm more focused on the reactive structure or running behaviors that are whatever I do when I get threatened, then you're going to see those kinds of behaviors showing up in the bottom half of your circle. We call those reactive tendencies. And so use the assessment to kind of get a sense for how you're showing up as a leader, to what extent your leadership is oriented toward a deep sense of purpose coming through and forming itself into vision that's strategic and lofty and captures your imagination and that of others, or more primarily oriented toward maintaining safety, not risking too much, as Larry Wilson called it, playing not to lose. So the 360 assessment that you're going to get results on is a good map of how am I showing up against a battery of key creative competencies. It's also going to give you some clue as to how you behave, how you show up when this takes over. I have a lot of this in me. Just ask the people who work for me. Most of my life is oriented here, but I still have plenty of this. So you're going to see the balance between the two and the interplay between the two. To what extent does my reactiveness impede my creative competency? You'll get some clue as to what structure of mind are you living in, what life stance are you operating out of. It's a very powerful instrument for looking at how do I show up in general, my life stance. Am I leading and living from this, or am I leading and living from this primarily? And Bob Keegan at Harvard talked about this as an actual stage of consciousness. The prior stage, the earlier stage of development, was a more reactive stage of consciousness. This is what Bob Keegan called self-authoring. It's not that I'm not creative over here. I can be very creative and be over here, but I'm creating and self-authoring a life out of this stance. You're going to get a clue as to the underlying assumptions that are running behavior. What do I mean by that? Well, let me go back to my life insurance story. I said to this guy, okay, I know what happens to you when you're here, when your results are low. You get disgusted with yourself and you swing into gear. So what happens to you when you're here, when it's going well? And he had a what goes across someone's face when they have an epiphany? And I said, what was that? He said, after some coaxing, he didn't want to tell me right away, he said, I thought of my dad in the church. I said, tell me about that. And then he got this deer in the headlights look. He says, my dad tried all his life to be successful and never was. You don't think I'd be worried about what my dad would think of me if I were more successful than he is? I said, I don't know. How's it feel? He goes, that's in there. I said, well, tell me about the church. He says, well, I've been taught all my life it's bad to have money. I said, so let me see if I got this right. Here, you're disgusted with yourself, and here, you're a bad person because your dad's going to hate you and you're going to hell. Is that about it? In the reactive structure, whether we're aware of it or not, we're actually reacting to threats to our sense of self, our security that we may not even be aware of. In his case, he had a risk of, he actually was threatened by success. He had assumptions in there that made him at risk if he was successful. This was a revelation to him, actually. We think you get much more leverage on the behavior change if you can see the assumptions that are running them. So some of us back off when conflict conflict enters the meeting on key issues with key stakeholders. Some of us take over, stop listening. So we all have our own way of engaging this. You're going to get a sense for what that is and the assumptions that are underneath that. Use it as a strength map. Certainly any strong scores in the top half are well-deployed strengths. But also think of the bottom half not as weaknesses, hear that, not as weaknesses, but as strengths being run in a reactive structure. Strengths overused or used in the wrong situation have liabilities associated with them. So there's a place for control. But if I use it too often, if I'm constantly using control to protect this, it's going to be a liability. And it's going to impede the effectiveness of my leadership. So use it as a strength map, both strong scores in top and bottom, and use it as an energy map. How are you expending your life's energy? We only have so much energy capital to expend. What we know about creative structure is it tends to generate energy. The closer and more focused we are on purpose, the more energy we actually have and generate. When we're more focused in reactive structure, it's actually energy draining, puts a drag on our capacity. So there's a lot going on in this assessment, and I invite you to use it and reflect on the results you get in lots of different ways to get some key insight that can unlock the next level of your leadership.